Today, I'm going to break down the difference between a reactive athlete and a rooted athlete. And this is the basis behind the name of my business, Rooted Sports Psychology Coaching, because I'm really helping athletes find the values and foundation that keep them stable when adversity hits. Just like a tree with very strong roots, with a strong foundation, when a storm blows through, it's going to be able to withstand that storm and stay very strong. If a tree does not have strong roots, it doesn't have a good foundation, it's going to get completely derailed anytime a storm comes through. So today I'll highlight the difference between a reactive athlete, a rooted one, why reactions show your foundation, how emotional regulation can really impact your performance. And at the end, I'll give a couple of tips on how to shift from a very reactive response to more of a rooted response. Because anybody can look confident when things are going your way and you're playing well. That's not hard to do. It's a whole nother ball game though when things aren't going your way. It's how can you stay confident? How can you stay adaptive and competitive even when adversity hits? So the difference between a very reactive athlete and a rooted one. Reactive athlete tends to be very emotionally driven. They might get really frustrated easily or scared or nervous easily. They might start playing safe and tight after mistakes because they don't want to make mistakes, so they're playing to avoid mistakes versus playing to win. They tend to chase confidence versus create it. So a reactive athlete might need a good play at the beginning of the game or a great warm-up in order to feel like they can compete and play well that day. So they're waiting around for a good play to happen versus going out and creating it. And they tend to need a lot of reassurance from their teammates, maybe how they're feeling. They need to make sure they're feeling good. And if they feel a little nervous, confidence immediately drops, even though nerves are completely normal. If they don't get a compliment from coach that day, they might be looking to play for coach's opinion and be so caught off guard and distracted by what coach is thinking. So a lot of their confidence is also placed in what other people are thinking. And they can really let coaches, refs, parents dictate their mindset that day. Now, the rooted athlete, they respond, not necessarily react. They're thinking through their responses. They're very anchored in controllables like attitude, effort, how they're responding to mistakes. They're staying very neutral after highs and lows. So if they play great, they're never getting too big of an ego. They're always considering what could have gone better. And if they don't have a great performance, then they're also trying to highlight what they did well and what they can continue to build off of. They really think about their preparation and they're trusting in that. So that way, most of their confidence isn't so reliant on the first couple of plays. And they're competing with more freedom versus fear. So they're playing to get the job done, they're playing to win versus playing to avoid mistakes, which is a very big difference. So the key thing here is that the pressure situations, adversities, it doesn't create the behavior, it reveals it. Most athletes that come to me for help at first tend to have a lot of these reactive qualities. They're playing with a lot of fear. They are playing a whole lot better in practice than competition because they're so worried and fearful about making mistakes and disappointing other people. They're placing a lot of confidence in how other people think about them. So I'm helping them develop the mental skills and values to keep them strong and really helping them redefine their process to keep them grounded in that versus getting so lost in outcomes like stats and calls and all those uncontrollables. I'll give you some examples here. Let's say a pitcher on a mound, they walk someone. A very reactive pitcher might start worrying about repeating that same mistake. So might be worrying about walking the next guy who comes up to bat, might start getting a little frustrated. You might start to see a shift in their body language. So maybe they become a little bit more tight, or maybe they're starting to rush through their routine on the mound. And now they're probably thinking, I can't do that again, versus simply just resetting and focusing on hitting their next spot. That's a very reactive reaction to a mistake. A rooted reaction, let's say different pitcher has more mental skills, knows their values, knows what works for them. They walk someone, he's going to hand it off to his teammates and know that he is allowed to make mistakes. Baseball literally has built-in mistakes for pitchers. He's going to stick to his routine So he's going to have the same pace. He's going to be in control of that. He will probably take a breath. He knows a good reset for himself. He knows to focus on the next task. So maybe he's looking at his catcher, getting the call, locking in on his next spot. He has completely let go of that last walk, and he's so focused on hitting his next spot and striking this next guy out. He has the same posture, and he's not forcing pitches. He's still trusting in his preparation. He's not overthinking his mechanics or anything like that. Just because he walks someone doesn't mean something is wrong. He knows that walks happen in baseball. He's very realistic and rational. He's going to let that go and focus on getting the next guy out. Another great example, let's say if an athlete, we'll use soccer for an example here, gets benched in the middle of a game. A very reactive one, they're going to shut down. They're probably going to look very disengaged from the game, probably going to be in their head thinking, me, why did coach pull me out? And they probably aren't going to be very engaged in the games and probably questioning coach too. Like, why did coach do that to me? Now they're getting all frustrated. A rooted athlete will think about the purpose of getting pulled out, which is probably to give them a little bit of a reset. So they're going to use that reset. They're going to grab some water. They're going to maybe talk to their teammates, maybe get a little piece of advice from coach. They're going to stay engaged in the game and supportive with their teammates. And they're going to just give themselves one focus to go back into the game with. That way they are more ready. So they're very rational. They use that as an opportunity to actually reset, whereas the reactive one will probably shut down and be very disengaged. Another good example is after a big win. A very reactive athlete will probably be posting all about it. They'll probably get this huge emotional high and be thinking that they don't necessarily need to practice as much anymore. They could get really complacent. Whereas a rooted athlete will just find a lot of gratitude. They'll probably give a lot of credit to their teammates. They'll probably focus on what they need to do next to keep building off of that. They'll probably think about what went really well and why they did so well. That way they can strengthen those processes that help them do well in the first place. And they're going to get right back to practice typically the next day. Now, I always tell my athletes, make sure you acknowledge those good performances and those wins. Don't just immediately move on without giving yourself some credit for that, because then it's not really motivating to do that again. The biggest difference here is that a rooted athlete is very grateful and they're still going to stay focused on their process. They aren't going to get too high and lost in all those outcomes and think, oh, well, I should be able to do that every single time. One more very relatable example here that is good for everybody. In regards to social media, I see my very reactive athletes comparing a lot on social media. They're not feeling very good about themselves. They're typically only posting maybe selfies or things that they did really well, lots of mood swings. A rooted athlete on social media has a lot of good boundaries. They know to probably not check social media after games, because they might see some negative stats or some negative comments. They know that what they see is just the best of somebody. Nobody's really posting their failures or their mistakes. They aren't comparing themselves. They have a strong identity off of whatever platform it is. They know that sport is not who they are. It's just something that they do, and it doesn't necessarily define them. Those value, those controllables, how resilient they are, how they respond to adversities, how they're treating their teammates, how their integrity is. Those are the traits that define them, not the outcome of their performance. So why athletes can get really stuck in being reactive is because a lot of their identity is directly tied to their performance. As an athlete, it's, especially with the club sports nowadays, it's all year round. It's really easy to think athletics is who they are. It's not something that they do. And they don't typically have any sort of reset routine. They are very dependent on how the outcome goes. So if it's a great game, they're probably feeling really great about themselves. If it's an awful game, they're probably feeling like a terrible, awful person. And they're constantly living in this evaluation process versus execution. A rooted athlete is focused on fixing it later and competing right now. There's not this huge emotional breakdown. They're just focused on executing the next play. So a couple of strategies for athletes who are listening here. If you are resonating and relating to any of these reactive examples, then you can work on being a little bit more rooted. First thing I'm going to give you is to really start developing a reset routine for yourself. This might be something that you say after mistakes, like, mistake doesn't matter. What matters most is my response to it. Maybe it's just a simple go. Maybe you cite a really good verse that resonates with you. Maybe it's more of a physical reset routine, like you're tugging up your socks or you're taking your hat off and slicking hair back and put it back on. Maybe you're looking at the foul pole in the distance and taking a breath, pretending to like throw out the trash, whatever it might be. But this is something that you do every single time, and it's symbolic of you letting go of that last mistake and moving on to what's most important, because the mistakes are going to happen to everybody in all sports, in all areas of life. The mistakes are going to happen. So it's not about the mistake, but it's really a matter of how you're responding to that mistake and making sure you have a solid process that helps you learn and move on from it. And then another thing I'm going to give you is to start thinking about these questions. What do you really value, and how do you want your teammates to describe you as? We always hear the saying, just be yourself. I'm saying screw that. Don't be like yourself. Be who you want to be until you become that person. If you want to be more confident, then act like a confident person until you become confident. If you want to be more resilient and care less about what other people think, then start acting like it until you become it. But what do you really value in athletes? What do you really, the values that you compete with? Maybe it's hard work, maybe it's the hustle plays, maybe it's just constantly thinking about what you can do for your teammates. And how do you want your teammates to describe you as? That will give you a good direction of where you need to go. So overall, being rooted in something unchanging is really important when adversity comes your way. The unchanging things are the resilience, how you respond to mistakes, how you think about pressure situations, your attitude, your effort. These controllables don't have to change depending on the context of the situation. And I'm not saying that the goal is to never feel emotion. You're going to feel emotions. You're human. That's normal. But the goal is to not let the emotion completely take over and run the performance. The goal is to let your values guide you through all of those adversities. If you want more help with this on becoming rooted athletes, reach out to me, Georgia at rootedsportspsychcoach.com. I do one-on-one training and team training. My email is in the show notes. You can also check out my website, rootedsportspsychcoach.com. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next week.